talk about choosing an operating model for your data. It is my great pleasure to introduce our three speakers: Pete Youngs, who is the managing partner of Ortecha, Sean Russell, principal consultant at Ortecha, and last but not least, Selena Wark, who is the head of data and CRM at the mental health charity Mind, that does exceptional work. It's a great pleasure to have all three of you here today. Thank you very much for volunteering your time.
Thanks, Frank.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks.
So let's start off. Here's a quick introduction, and I'm sure as people are dialing in and dialing up, last month, if you didn't attend the last webinar, we talked about designing a data strategy. This was a deep dive into the why, the needs, the objectives of the organization, and the strategy is the plan. But how do you bring the plan to life? The plan comes to life when you operationalize it with an operating model. We're going to be talking about the data operating model. We're going to discuss the approach, various approaches to data operating models, the core concepts behind an operating model, and then more practically, what are the foundations for getting your operating model up and running? So if data strategy is the map that gets you to your destination, then the op model is very much the vehicle. It needs a driver, it needs wheels, it needs fuel, and for some of you, it may even need a Steely Dan playlist to actually be effective. So over the next hour, we're going to be going through this topic. It's in 3 parts, and we'd love to make this interactive. Obviously, we can't see you, but we can certainly read in the chat box. So to get us started, I'm going to launch a little poll. Let me know if you can see this. In front of you on screen, you should see a little poll, a little survey. I'd like to ask, what brought you here today? Did you want to learn about an operating model? Are you already working with an operating model in practice within your organization? Is something not working with your operating model? Things around governance, the data management framework, the data culture, funding your data value use cases. What brought you here today? Interesting. Overwhelmingly, everyone wants to learn about an operating model, and that's great. Some of you want to design or update your operating model, which tells me that we've got a good split between practitioners and data leaders. So there are a lot of you who are wanting to revise and update your operating model, or some of you that are wanting to dig into the detail. What is it? How does it work? Why is it important? So now in the chat box, I'd like you to introduce yourself. What's your first name? What city are you joining us from? And give us 1 sentence or 1 keyword about yourself. I'll give us all 60 seconds. Obviously, I'm going to do this verbally. Hi, I'm Frank Sullivan. I'm your host, and I'm here to talk about the operating model for data management. Can everyone see the chat box? Navina, Daniel, Peter, Paul, Lucy, welcome. Wow, Spain, Portland, Oregon. We've got one of our partners from Calibre, fantastic. Salt Lake City, Utah, Germany. Frankfurt, wow. San Jose. Wow. Okay, this is a lot more than I was expecting. That is fantastic. Let's put a big smile on my face. I like it when people show up to my webinars. Okay, so let's jump into the topic. Part 1, approaching an operating model. What is a data op model? Why is it needed? And what's its relationship to your data strategy? I'm going to pick on you first. The inimitable Pete Young, managing partner at Ortecha. What is an op model for data when it's at home on a Tuesday?
Okay, thanks, Frank. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. So for me, a data operating model is really how you do data. So your organization has a business operating model. So even if it's actually not documented, not written down, you are operating in some way. So your data operating model is an extension of your organizational operating model. Sometimes we talk about centralized, decentralized, federated, and so on. So whatever you've got as your organizational operating model, your data operating model is going to be an extension of that. And you're probably going to align, if it's a federated model, you're probably going to align to a federated model in your data operating model. Otherwise, things might conflict. So it really depends on your maturity. Typically, an immature data organization is looking to implement a data operating model. So when you start to pay more attention to data, when you want to manage data effectively, and when you want to enable analytics, you'll start to define your data operating model. So we really boil it down to 4 fundamental parts, which are people, tooling, governance, and capability. And I'll step through each one briefly because I think it sets up all of the rest of the conversation. So the people part is really important. Who does what with your data? What processes do they execute? It's defining your data owners, or you might have data product owners. It's defining your data stewards, both technical and business. It isn't just a technical thing. That's really important. It's the bridge to the business as well. It's even defining your data team or your data office. So all of the roles that have core accountabilities or responsibilities on data, they all need to be defined within your data operating model. So that's the people part. The tooling part, what tools are needed? So people are going to use tools to automate data management, enable analytics. So things like your data catalog, data quality tools, all of these need to be defined, how you'll manage issues and so on. So that's the people and the tooling part. We then step into governance, which is fairly light, but it's really important. How you make authoritative decisions, how you oversee the people and the tools, such as prioritization decisions is one example. And then we have the slightly more abstract capability part. But if you think of this as what you need to do on data, you need the people to do it. You need the tools to enable that ability to do something. So those things you need to do are the capabilities that you need to establish. Some examples might be data quality management, data issue management. So lots of capabilities will need to be defined so that the people can use them and operate them. The tools can be used to automate them, and you can make decisions around those capabilities. So if you do want more information on capabilities, I recommend you take a look at EDM Council's material. They've got the DCAM framework, they've got the CDMC framework, and they're both a definition of data capabilities. So that's a great resource to have a look and get some insight on.
Pete, that's a
really,
that's a
I was just going to say one, because
introduction.
you mentioned culture, Frank. I think just to call that out. So people may be thinking, what about training? What about culture and so on? So they're all parts of capability, maybe not data culture, but I think we'll probably tackle that in a future data leadership series event.
It's almost like you're prescient and you know what August topic is going to be.
I can see into the future.
Pete, thank you very much. That's a wonderful introduction. It would be remiss of me not to mention and pass on my great thanks to Araminta and Tanya, who are part of the team here. They are going to be on live chat, and they are going to be your points of contact. So Tanya heads up business development in the UK, and Araminta is head of people and culture. If you would like to say hello to them in the chat box, they will be able to speak with you directly, or if you have any issues, you can feel free to reach out to them. So my heartfelt thanks to you guys for doing all of the hard work in the background and making it look easy for us four. Pete, you introduced the topic and defined the operating model and its components, but Selena, the work that you're doing and the work that your charity Mind is doing is phenomenal. You're the leading mental health charity in the UK. I can't think of a more worthy cause where, good data is informing service users. But why is an operating model needed? When we first spoke, you said, without one, it's chaos. So going back to that point, why do we need an operating model for data?
Yeah. I think data's seen as often as somebody else's job. So for me, the operating model is all about making data accountabilities clear for everybody, and with everybody knowing what they're doing, how people interact with each other. And that's both for the data team and for the business. It also aligns us to, enables us to align to best practice and attract the right people to the right roles. Having really good, clear roles and progression paths allows us to attract and retain good data talent, which is really hard these days. And it removes silos from ways of working, so the right hand knows what the left is doing, and enables us to adapt with change. As you said, without one, it's chaos. Everyone's working in silos and doing their own thing, and there might be pockets of excellence, but there's still huge gaps, and people don't really understand how they fit into the bigger picture. And it's really hard then to scale up or keep up with the changing world. And it makes it really hard to articulate the need for more resource when there's business and industry changes, as the roles are so unclear. Just sort of think, well, you've got a lot of data people already, why would you want any more? So yeah, right hand knowing what the left is doing, and that excellent ways of working can be shared and learnings aren't lost. And just to really reinforce that data is everybody's job, and it's a true asset to every part of the organization. So the model allows us to draw that value from our data.
I think if I can pick up one of several gems in that, Selena, you're talking about ways of working, that the operating model is the engine or the model of models. It's your ways of working. I think that's a wonderful interpretation. And yes, without it, what are we doing? The left hand does not speak to the right hand.
I think if it's possible for me to jump in, I think there's another gem there that it really resonates with my experience. So pockets of excellence, those pockets of excellence, an operating model is designed to bring those out and proliferate them. And that kind of recognition people can go without that for years. And that dissolves morale. It creates a culture of defeatism, which you don't want. Operating model is designed to make sure that best practice culture and proliferation of success is spread throughout the organization, and that's key.
From pockets of excellence to centers of excellence.
That's
Sean,
it.
That's an interesting bridge into the third question here, which is speaking about data strategy as the plan, starting with the why, the objectives and the needs mapping, and the op model, ways of working, pulling out or perhaps pulling up those pockets of excellence.
Yep.
What's the relationship between your data strategy and the op model?
It's a great question. So the key to understanding the relationship is exactly as you said in your introduction. Data strategy is the map. It defines where you're going. Operating model is the car you drive to get there. And so, not every car needs to be a Tesla. You don't need to have a pickup truck and four-wheel drive to get to your corner store if that's all you're looking to get to. So, not all the options are necessary, but you've got to have the basics. And the basics are, seats in a car to make sure that there are people, that's your resources or your automation. If you're able to automate some of your functionality, you need wheels. That's your capability, which is what Pete was talking about earlier. You can't go up the road in a car without wheels. I know, I've tried, it doesn't work. You need, let's say, you need the drivetrain. Most cars these days have a computer, which may be even easier to relate to technology and tooling. And you need fuel, and that's your data. And that's everywhere in business these days, which underlines the importance of why you need to kind of pull all these things together to measure and manage that ubiquitous force that exists within the industry. And most importantly, you need a licensed driver. And that licensed driver is your governance. You need somebody in charge who can point the direction. All cars have more, well, most cars anyway, have more than one seat, but no car has more than one steering wheel. And that's your driver. Super important. So think about a data strategy as defining the destination. Think about an operating model as the vehicle, as you say, the vehicle you take to get there. Really key.
As you say that, you know, the driver, the drivetrain, the fuel, the seats, and the one steering wheel. Would that perhaps make ChatGPT the pink furry dice that hangs from the dashboard, distracting everybody?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Absolutely. So there's so many, and Selena, you and I talk about this a lot. There's an attraction to shiny objects, right? And that's, you know, and EDM Council has said the same, Pete. And yeah, it's one of those things that's everywhere. There's an attraction to shiny objects. Data strategy and operating model working together can help make sure that while shiny objects are attractive, you are focused on the fundamentals, which is aligning to your strategic objectives.
We have a question from Gerben. How do you deal with resistance to change in the organization? That is one of the biggest blockers to success in data. And I think we can answer that during the Q&A. Gerben, I won't forget that. That's top of mind. Before we move on to the next section, I'd really like to give you all a mental model how to think about this, because what persists after the webinar, we're here, some of you might be driving, some of you might have taken us to the bathroom with you on your phone. However, I want to give you something that you can take away with you after this hour. It's a mental model, right? You start off by recognizing the business need, the why, the objective, what is driving the need. That leads into a capability. A capability is defined by Pete. It's the thing that you need to get done. It's the function of the business that needs to deliver. Thumbs up, Pete, if I've butchered that.
That works, Frank.
From the capability, you move to the third level. It's the process. What is the workflow? What is the actual set of tasks that needs to be done? And is it linear? Is it cyclical? Is it something that should be done manually by a human? Or is it something that's automated, that's part of a management system, a piece of software, a control system? So is it a person job doing it once that could be automated, or is it already a job to be automated? And then the fifth and final part is the measurement. Have you achieved the outcome? Have you achieved the output of the workflow? And is that delivering the outcome that you mapped all the way in step one, which was the business need? And if you have any blockers along that 5-step process, think need, capability, process, people and automation, and the measurement thereof. If you have any blocker along there, you know that it's time to go back to the op model to say, how are we doing this at scale? If we're messing up on this particular workflow or this particular business need, my goodness, what are we doing across the rest of the business? Some of you may work as principals, as consultants. Some of you may be working with large enterprises that may have thousands of employees. Keeping this as a mental model in how you communicate to your stakeholders, not just how you run your own business and your own line of business function for data, is really important. So can I get a 30-second summary from each of you, starting with Selena? What is your approach to an op model as it relates to your business or generally as a practitioner? Selena.
Well, we've recently been looking at our op model, and so we've actually started by understanding what our capabilities were. So we've done a DCAM assessment across the organisation, and we understand where good things are happening and where our gaps are. And from that, and we did that with Ortecha. We chose to take a partner in this journey, and throughout the journey. So first from understanding where our gaps are, looking at our current landscape, looking at best practice roles, and understanding what good looks like out in the world, but then taking the nuance of charity and our ways of working blending that with our organization strategy, our data strategy, our, our current maturity, and then from that designing a new operating model. We've also used the Design Council's double diamond approach. So it's a truly collaborative process throughout. So we've been doing research across the organization. We've been involving our end users and those affected at every stage along the way, and we're talking in their language, dropping the jargon, and really pulling out real life examples, and by involving people along the way, that is kind of helps that resistance to change. They take ownership within that process, but also by using independent experts, it's also giving that extra bit of a sounding board, and allowing people sort of to delve in what's going on in the rest of the world, and whether all this change is needed.
Wonderful. Thank you, Selena. Sean, my conclusion is going to be a little bit different. We need to co-create now. It's the approach is very much informed, if not heavily influenced, by the organizational structure. If you have a very distributed organization or a very centralized organization, that's going to largely dictate how your operating model plays out. So with that in mind, how would you summarize the approach to choosing an operating model?
That's a great way to put it. I think when you're talking about, if you're talking about how we choose and whether or not we're choosing a centralized approach or a federated approach, I think in my experience, you look at the size of the organization, you look at the data that you're dealing with, and you decide whether or not a central team is going to be capable of handling that kind of a volume, or whether or not you need to you need to make sure that the rest of the business is taking responsibility for execution as well as ownership. I want to make one thing very clear. I wouldn't advocate any model that removed the business from ownership of the data, whether it's central or federated. I think you absolutely have to have your data owned by the people who are most invested in it, and that's the business. However, if you're small enough, if you've got a 20, 25 person team, then absolutely maybe a central team will do you. These days, with organizations growing apace, most of the organizations I work with would do best with a federated operating model that distributes responsibility for data throughout the organization, not only because it helps to mitigate that volume problem, but also because the business needs to go on that journey. We need to, all of us, start to be thinking about what we can do with data, how data can better impact the businesses that we're working with.
So Pete, final question for you on part one. Selena's given the perspective as being a leader operating this kind of journey. Sean has talked about the approach to choosing based on the organizational structure. Let me ask you this final question. It's a niche question. Is there ever a point in time where it's appropriate, based on the maturity of the organization or the maturity of their enterprise data management function, to start centralized and go federated, or to accelerate the journey from centralized to federated, or even reverse the flow, go from messy, chaotic, federated to highly decentralized, to highly centralized?
Yeah, I've been personally involved in both sides of that coin. So in an immature organization, I think there is a lot to be said to start in the center. You need to take people on a journey. Sean touched on a really important point, was that because data is pervasive in every organization, we have to embed data management and analytics capability in literally every team in your organization, HR, finance, product teams, and so on. So it can be a journey. You've got to coerce those people. I think Herben mentioned in the chat resistance to change. You're starting to help people understand they need to do more with data. So actually supporting them from the center as a starting point can be really powerful, but it's always with a view that you'll federate that capability and the execution of that capability back into where your business processes run. We have seen organizations go almost too far where their center is tiny and they're continuously trying to coerce people in business teams, if you like, to do what they're meant to do. And it can be really hard. So I do think there's a lot to be said. Obviously align to your organizational model with whether it's decentralized, federated, whatever, but do think about what you need in the center to really support those people as they get up to speed. And I think we're going to give away something on the takeaways here, but finding your champions, as you find those people that are really good and a really good business data steward, for example, just clutch onto them, help them to help you and coach other people and train other people.
A wise man once said to me, you can do it yourself in data, you can have it done for you in data, but if you don't get on board, you're going to have data done to you.
Quite right.
Moving on. Thank you very much. Part 2. So let's just have a quick 30-second scan of the questions to see if there's anything burning here. I think overcoming resistance to change, understanding some of the impediments, and aligning the business to data, or aligning data teams to the business, more specifically, is what will improve the probability of your success. Rick, that's a great point. Management changes, right? If you've been moving along with a data strategy that's out of date and you don't have an operating model, or the operating model is a single PowerPoint slide that nobody's read since 2018, then perhaps now is a good time to raise that conversation. Maybe there has been something disruptive in your business. Financial crisis, rising interest rates, collapse of a bank, a pandemic on a retailer. Maybe there is something that has been an impediment to which data could be the answer. Greater insight, greater transparency, greater innovation. So maybe that's what prompts the timing. The secret to success in data is also the secret to success in comedy. Timing, which I'm trying to get back. So I'm going to move on to part 2 here. Understanding the core concepts. So Pete, you laid out the definition of an op model. Let me ask, and whoever wants to go first here, mainly because I can't remember who I wrote down should answer this question. What are the components of an op model? Sean?
I can go. Yeah.
I can see those eyebrows moving.
So, well, Pete's already kind of outlined the core components of an op model, and I've already underlined that outline with the whole metaphor about a car. But just high level, people, processes, tooling, governance, and I would add data, as I did with the car metaphor, because I think you don't do without it. But to add a little bit of color to that, which I think is the value. When we say people, we don't mean data people. We mean business people. We mean technology people. We mean everybody. When you're talking about an operating model for data, you're not just talking about how data processes take place. You're talking about how business processes leverage data, and you're talking about how technology provides value and service with data to the business. That's key. Processes, again, you're reaching beyond central. It's not just about defining your data elements or your data attributes. It's also about how you leverage data in reporting. Where are you getting your reporting from? And can you trust it? Can you trust those sources? Do you know where they are? Tooling, again, going beyond, just tools. And I'm going to go ahead and say pretty much every tool that we're talking about in this conversation uses data, right? So it's pointless to say it's more than just your data catalog, but it's also the relationship between tools and how they talk to each other. That's the thing that gets lost sometimes. You need to be thinking about how one system interacts with another to provide information. Is there loss? Is there risk involved in that? And governance, speaking of risk, governance, very important to identify areas of risk, areas of priority. Frank, you just mentioned when do you want to revisit your operating model discussion if it's collecting dust in a PowerPoint? I would say the answer, if there's a mark of dust on that PowerPoint, the answer is right now, because there's risk out there that hasn't been assessed for a while. An operating model is designed to mitigate that risk. But as much as that's a lot, you don't necessarily have to do all of it at once. You don't boil the ocean. A friend of mine said, think big, but start small. Take an iterative approach, as Pete said earlier on in this conversation. Take an iterative approach, start with a pilot and build out from there. Start with a strong central focus and build out from there. But yeah, absolutely. People, processes, tooling, governance, and of course, the fuel for the car, your data.
I don't often enjoy contradicting my learned colleagues when they make such an excellent point of revisiting your data structure. But I will pick you up on when. Don't revisit your operating model right now. Wait until 1 minute past 4 o'clock after we finish the panel.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Well, of course.
I'm going to have to ask, can you more closely define a capability, Pete? I'm still torn around certain terms, let's say, between what's a process and a workflow, what's is a capability, a use case, or a thing that we could do. What is a capability as it relates to the operating model? And can you give some use cases or examples from your practice?
Yeah, sure. So again, I would refer people to look at EDM Council material, because there's a lot of capabilities, especially in the DCAM framework, that people could have a look through, and obviously come back to us if you've got questions on those. I think best done by example. So I mentioned data quality management, data quality measurement earlier. So let's step through that. So we'd be saying, in order to have effective data management and enablement of analytics, we do need high quality data. Therefore, we need to establish the ability, the capability to measure and manage our data quality. So with that in mind, we want to encapsulate that, say, how are we going to do that? We need the people involved, we need tools involved, and we need to make decisions and have governance around it. So I think just to say DQ, there's two types, typically preventative and detective. So preventative is where you're establishing controls up front. Detective is more downstream measurement. So let's think about the detective side, because people generally get it more. So here we want to run rules on our data, and we want to be able to measure the quality of our data, and we want to show the results on dashboards so that people can see that rules are running and that data is of good quality, because if people can see that, they will trust the data more. So that's our objective by implementing this capability. So back on our tooling, people and governance points, on the tooling, you need a data quality tool. It's not a surprise, really. So tools like Calibra DQ or Datactics, they are core data quality tools. Yes, if you're using Azure, there may be other tools you can use and so on. So you need to decide what tool you're going to use in order to measure data quality and where that's going to happen. So where are you going to implement that capability using that tooling? And it's probably not going to be in one place, but let's say it's in your data platform using Datactics, and that's the choices you make. So that's more of the tech and tooling side of the capability. The people then, so those rules are going to run, results are going to be discovered, and then you're going to show them on a clever Power BI dashboard. You then need people to look at them. So typically, a business data steward is going to be defined as owning or overseeing, I shouldn't say owning, because a data owner will own it. The business data steward is going to oversee the day-to-day stewardship of that data. So they're going to be looking at that data quality dashboard for their given data domain and monitoring it. And when the quality is declining, they're going to be trying to find out why. They're going to be raising data issues, and then they're going to be triaging and working to get those issues remediated. So there we've just actually crept from one capability, data quality management, into data issue management. It's another capability you need. You need the ability to manage issues and get them remediated. And then governance, whatever that capability is, whether it's data quality management, whether it's data issue management, and yes, there's lots more, you need some authoritative decision making. You need to be able to prioritize when you've got 50 issues and you don't know where to start. You need to prioritize what data you're going to run data quality on, because you're not going to do all of it tomorrow. So governance needs to come into play there. So hopefully that describes an example using DQ. Yeah, hopefully that helps.
Further to your prescient ability, I was going to ask, but now I'm going to have to zoom in on it. Can I ask you a follow-up question here?
Of course.
Is good decision making a capability? In two parts. There's helping make business decisions or line of business decisions. That's how you run your organization. But when it comes to governance, the ability to get investment or the ability to decide what needs to be done, is decision-making a capability within the op model itself?
Yeah, I'd say it's part of governance. So you need to establish governance. I think we've probably all been in governance meetings where you question some of the decisions that are made. So good decision making, I'll leave that for everyone to monitor and check that good decisions are being made. But yes, it should be part of governance. Unless you're allocating accountability for people to make decisions autonomously, typically that's coming back to some sort of governance structure that will make that decision. And by the way, that doesn't just mean a quarterly meeting and you've got to wait 3 months to make a decision. Governance can be built in to workflows. There can be different ways of doing governance. It's not just a meeting on a monthly or quarterly basis.
Many of us attendees, panelists, our colleagues, many of us have said quietly but disappointedly to ourselves, my goodness, they are utterly incapable of making a decision. That is precisely the cause, that's the effect, but the cause is that effective decision-making is not a capability. So if you've ever said to yourself, my goodness, they're incapable of making a decision, treat that for what it is. It's an effect of the lack of capability. And decision-making is the primary driver. Well, good decision-making is the primary need driving good governance. So when it comes to making, sorry, go ahead, Pete.
I was just going to say, Frank, I think that comes back to the point earlier that often when people aren't making decisions, it's because there isn't someone accountable for something. Someone isn't empowered to be making that decision. They may be consulting on other people. So this comes back to the people part of the op model, the right people accountable for making decisions. Yes, there might be consultation in governance. Obviously, prioritization is something to be discussed. But if you've got people who are empowered and accountable, typically you're in a better place for making those decisions effectively.
So Pete and Sean, you're coming at this from the perspective of best practice. This is what you teach. This is what you put into your own day-to-day work. Selena, you're on the front lines as a data leader. How does the capability and making good decisions, how does that relate to what you've so eloquently described as ways of working? How does the op model improve ways of working?
Well, I suppose it starts with going back to the decision-making piece there. Good decisions made on bad data are going to be bad decisions. But if there's no data at all, then decisions need to be made on relationships and gut instinct. And so often when there's bad data quality, we end up making our decisions based on relationships and gut instinct. For us as a charity, we need to make sure that every single penny is spent wisely and on the cause that those that support us intended it to. And so although we have a lot of knowledgeable people that have worked in the mental health space for many years and understand things inside out, we need more than just gut instinct and relationships. We need to be making, and we also need to make sure the decisions we make are equitable and we're transparent in our decision making, and people don't just know what decision has been made, but also why it's been made and how we got to that. And you can only do that with data. And so yes, I suppose bringing it to life, data is absolutely key. Data-driven decision-making is key to our success as a charity, not just making the right decisions, but understanding the impact of our work and being transparent and equitable and distributing decision-making across the organization, and not just being made by a few people in a dark room and no one knows why.
Many of us will be aware of the existence of Mind, but they won't be aware of the scale of the impact. When you told me 157 stores across the country, that makes you a national retailer.
That's
when I
right.
think about being such a big policy influencer. That makes you a healthcare services provider. You are many things, many different interpretations of doing vital work. But tell us about the scale of the impact. This is not a small charity. This is a nationwide, well, largely could be internationally perceived. Tell us about the scale of the impact of this work.
Yeah, so and it's not just our 157 retail stores or charity shops, as most people know them as. It's also, we are a federation, so there are 100 local mines up and down the country, independent charities working together as a federation to out on the ground to support people in mental health challenges. We have a whole range of services. Please do feel free to go to our website and get all the detail. I won't do it good justice today, but there are thousands of decisions that need to be made every single day, and that's why data is so central to everything we do.
Thank you, Selena. Thanks, Sean and Pete. So to sum up, some of the core concepts around the op model. We've talked about the structure of data, the structure of the organization, the structure of your governance, and really good governance is about making good decisions. Selena's spoken about ways of working and how the ops model translates the theory into the practice, where road meets rubber. And obviously the impact on hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people around the country. And we've seen some examples from Pete around defining a capability. Incident management, data quality, understanding the lineage, or metadata management. Perhaps that's something that we can go into later. Let's have 30 seconds just to scan through the questions to see. Does anyone have any questions about the core concepts that we've discussed here today? There are a couple of things we've left off that are noteworthy. Data culture, which we're going to talk about next month. Building a funding plan for, off cycle or on cycle, who's going to pay for all of this data work, data literacy, education and training. These are also important parts, but I guess these are ancillary topics around the ops model. So I'm going to give everyone 30 seconds just to hammer away on the chat box there.
I think, Frank, maybe just a quick word. I think, well, historically, data literacy and maybe the more, maybe now we want to call it data fluency, because most people have some kind of concept around data at this point. While that's been more of an ancillary topic, one of the things I can say is we're seeing that become more central to the operating model. And the more recent operating models that I've worked on with businesses involve building out data fluency. And it's for exactly the same reason we've been talking about. It's because everybody in the business needs to understand how to leverage that data. So yeah, data fluency is a key part when you're discussing resources. You're also discussing data fluency.
Okay, I'm going to move on here. Part 3,
Frank,
building
sorry,
strong.
Could we just quickly pick up on Rick's question around adaptability? Because I think that's really important. That so we mentioned the strategy and the operating model. Once they're defined, don't just leave them on the shelf. If they've got a speck of dust on them, then you need to revisit them. So if anyone's done this, you're going to experience it's difficult. You're changing the organization and you do have to be able to adapt. So don't think defining your operating model on the 1st of January and then just blindly implementing that through the year. It may sound obvious, but it's going to evolve. So on Rick's point, you have to be able to adapt. You have to be able to tweak that operating model, but don't go too far. Once you've started to implement the operating model, to change it too much can be hugely disruptive because you're going back and changing what you've already rolled out and you've started to implement. So strike that balance of adapting your operating model to meet the business need and evolving organization, but avoid it becoming disruptive because it can just be, you can just lose everyone with that. So I think it's a really important point that we should call out.
Agreed. So good point, Rick. Navina's also made an excellent point here, right? We've been talking about the operating model as it relates to internal stakeholders. How do internal teams work together? We haven't really talked about what happens when you bring external people into your operating model. Navina's made the point that, there's no point in bringing in the world's best data engineer into a retailer, into a bank or a financial services company, if they have no concept of financial compliance, or they have no concept of marketing and e-commerce. There is domain fluency across the business, and often parachuting specialists in to do a data job, if your operating model doesn't allow for them to become quickly onboarded and conversant in what your business or what your line of business does, then you get this friction between what the technologist wants to do and what the commercial domain actually needs as a capability. Great point, Navina. Thank you. Let's move on. Let's get practical. Okay, part 3 is building the foundations. After this event, we're going to make available an article which will go into the detail of how to design and how to implement an operating model. This has been a collaborative effort from a number of colleagues here. But let's get started. Sean, we talked about the secret to comedy being good timing, and 4:01 p.m. GMT is the best time to revisit that dusty slide. How and when should we get started, right? Give this to me from 2 perspectives, right? I'm a practitioner, senior practitioner, and I'm trying to influence my leaders, or I'm a leader and I'm trying to do this organization-wide. How and when should I get started? Or perhaps even accelerate the process?
So I think from a question of when, as you say, 1 minute past 4, if you're a leader and you can, and you don't have an operating model right now to support your data efforts, 1 minute past 4 is the perfect time. If, however, you are, you have an operating model and you're working on an operating model, you want to accelerate. When you are building or refreshing your data strategy, that's an ideal time to start, because, and if you're a practitioner and you want to say to your data leader, listen, you guys are refreshing the data strategy. Right now is the time we need to talk about this, because you're setting out, you're choosing your destinations. So we have to have a conversation about what kind of car we want to get there, or what kind of car we need, what options do we need to include in that car, and that's key. So it also, by the way, to your point, going back to your point about shiny objects, operating model and strategy at the same time empower you to mitigate that whole drive toward the shiny object. Sometimes we end up, what is it, magpies that go after jewelry? I think, in the park, magpie, we end up going toward that shiny object. It's a lot more difficult to do that when you have right in front of you the resources and conversations around governance and the business requirements. How you get started, start with the business requirements. Even if your data strategy is, I would say, if your data strategy is more than 2 months old, have another conversation about business requirements. Why? Because business requirements, business objectives change over time. Frank, you mentioned earlier, things can happen. There could be triggering events. Your strategy may be out of date or out of step. Also, you want to focus on people. Selena said earlier how much this needs to be a cross-organizational effort to build out an operating model. You need to pull those people in close, and the first and best way to do that is to listen to their needs. So understanding that gives you a good first step toward building out your operating model, and that's what I would start with. The next thing, just because I've got the mic, is identifying what your data needs to be and do in order to fulfill those requirements. You might need to focus on data quality, probably need to focus on data quality. Most people need to focus on data quality. Does your data need to be available real time whenever somebody needs it? Does reporting need to be available on demand? Does it need to accurately and ethically use data to predict customer behavior? Very important points. Or assess market risk. Any of these things could dictate how you design your operating model to optimize for that business success.
Sean, thank you very much. I'm going to not steal the mic, I'm going to pass the mic. Selena, I'm going to place you in the hot seat now, because you're actively doing this. Of all of us, you're in the thick of it, so to speak. What does good look like? So you're already into your journey. You know what bad looks like. You know what best practices look like. You're kind of in the middle now on that journey towards unlocking the benefits and unlocking the value from your op model. So what does good look like to you and to your CEO, your stakeholders on the board? And how are you measuring success along the way? I do apologize.
Super. Yeah, good for us is data having an impact, and in order to articulate the impact that we believe that data could have, we worked with the organization to create a model to understand impact. So increasing agility and resilience, so ensuring that our data architecture is fit for purpose and that systems are integrated into a robust data ecosystem that can flex and scale rapidly with demand. Improving efficiency and productivity, so data-driven processes are streamlined and automated where possible, so manual handling of data is significantly reduced. Reducing operational risk, so best practice data governance is applied across the whole of Mind Federation, and that data ethics and regulatory compliance are central to our DNA. But also the cultural elements on top of those foundations, so fostering a high-performing culture, making sure that power is shared through universal access to business intelligence, and being data-enabled and insight-driven fosters equity and drives results. Improving employee well-being, we're a mental health charity, so this is important to us, and that more responsive data and tech improves employee well-being, and automated processes reduce workloads. We also want to enable data-driven decisions, consolidated data, centralized metrics, one view of the truth, so data can be based, so decisions can be based, on evidence and insight. And we want to transform the audience experience, making sure our beneficiaries and supporters and partners feel known by us, and that data-driven communications are timely and relevant, just as a start. And if we do all that, we know that will increase income and return on investment, taking human-centered design and engagement approach will improve return on investment and increase retention of our supporters and lifetime value to give us that big money. And then finally, we want to make sure all of the projects we do are enabling strategic goals, and that data-driven projects are selected for their alignment with the organizational strategy. And it's really clear how they can help have an impact on delivering our strategic priorities and goals. How we measure that, we have a range of metrics underneath all of those things. And most recently, we've been looking at, like I say, the DCAM scores, and breaking down where our capabilities are good and where there are gaps. And then we've put in a capabilities uplift plan to fill those gaps and to make sure we have those really strong foundations, so we can go into the next chapter of our organizational strategy with confidence that data is going to be a true partner and deliver value to the whole of the organization.
I think you mentioned something phenomenal there, which was about, not just equality, but equity, right? Equity of decision-making. You're saying when everyone has equal access to information across the Federation through equal access to business intelligence, you reduce and mitigate the impact of information asymmetry. You don't end up with a political concentration of power and decision-making with one business unit, or you don't have people fighting at loggerheads over the data or over the information, because everyone has equal access. I think that's a wonderful component of success. Thanks for that answer. Pete, we're coming up to time here. We've got 5 minutes. So 2 things. Could you recall, and Araminta, can you write down in the chat box for Navina, what were the data quality tools that you mentioned? You mentioned Calibra and one other?
Calibra DQ and Datactics.
Okay.
Are the 2 I mentioned. Yeah.
Okay, Tanya or Araminta, if you don't mind writing down data tactics and Calibra for Navina in the chat box, everyone can see that. That was just a question that came through. Thanks very much. Pete, 4 minutes to go. I'm going to give 2 minutes and then we'll jump into key takeaways.
Well, I think, are we going to run through the key takeaways here? Is that what we want to summarize?
Well, I've asked the question as a bridging question into the key takeaway, so we might as well just move on. Key takeaways here. Pete.
Okay, yeah.
Go ahead.
So choosing a data operating model, we mentioned this at the start, that aligns with your wider business operating model. So I think we've touched on this a few times. So if you run, for example, we work with a very large bank, had a very small data office and very autonomous, sort of federated, decentralized model. Other organizations, other banks we work with, just to mention a couple of financial service clients, very large central team in the chief data office, and then trying to percolate that down into the division. So really think about what your wider business operating model is and align to that. Don't just follow it. Think about what might work for you within data, but obviously don't jar with what's existing within the organization. Don't think you don't need a data op model. Selena mentioned the chaos and people not knowing what they're doing. So you will experience that if you've set your strategy and then you don't think about the people and the tooling and capability and governance. So even if you keep it light, just really think about that. That feeds into start small. We would always say, we actually use the words value case rather than use case, because we always want to drive that a use case has to deliver some business value. So even if you start with one data owner or one data product owner, depending on how you see data, and if you're into the world of product management, literally start with one use case or value case with one data owner. Obviously, you need to define your operating model before that, but start small, show those successes, and then move on from there. Focus on the people. I hope this has come across from today that obviously tooling is part of it, governance is part of it, but the people side is so important. So find those champions. In my experience, it's typically a data steward, and they're just absolutely brilliant. They know everything. They know their business area. They get data, and they can be a real advocate for what you're trying to achieve. So get them operating in the model that you want, and then help them to roll out to different areas. But importantly, show how it works. Don't just talk about it, show how it works. Tools, they're really, really important. Data tactics, Calibra DQ, you're going to need some tools, but we typically recommend you don't start with tools. There is a balance here. You want to get the people in place, and then when you want to scale or look at bringing the tools in, there is a catch-22 on budget. If you've missed the boat on budget and you realize you need the tool, you're going to struggle. So get ahead on the budget, know where you're heading because you defined it in your operating model. But typically we recommend you don't lead with tools. And lastly, we hear this a lot, data people, we're perhaps not that good at sharing our successes. Sometimes, dare I say, it gets a bit geeky as well, but think about the communication, share your successes. If you've got that great data steward and you've achieved something, call it out, share it with everyone, show the value, and keep doing that, because otherwise you're just working in a vacuum and you can lose your leadership. So make sure you've got someone on point on comms, sharing your successes and making sure that's regular.
Wonderful. Data is very much a team sport. And to do it well, you need these 5 key takeaways. You need to understand the strategy, the why of it. I love what Paul Anthony Carey, welcome back. I remember that name from the first one. He says, the vision is for the next 100 years. The op model is for the year ahead. Synthesizing that a little bit. I think that's wonderful. I sincerely apologize that we don't have a lot of time. We're at 4 o'clock now. The recording will be made available to everyone. We're going to pop it up on YouTube after we sanitize all of my ums and ahs and filler words, I'm sure. Thank you so much for being with us. We know it takes a lot. It's Thursday, it's an afternoon between 3 and 4. Thank you for giving us your valuable time. We do this because we want to inspire, educate, and have a little bit of fun along the way. Pete Young's managing partner of Ortecha, Sean Russell, principal consultant, and Selena Wark, head of data at Mind. You've been wonderful, wonderful speakers, and I'm sure, certainly on behalf of all of our audience, if we could send them a big thank you in the chat box there. Thank you very much for volunteering your time. In terms of the next event, we will be on the 17th of August. There will be an invite going out along with a recap of this event and a link to the article. Take a screenshot of this, or feel free to pop this into the chat box for everybody. Please feel free. Oh, I've just put in 2 links there. Please feel free to add both. Oh, goodness. There you go. Feel free to add both managing partners on LinkedIn, Mark McQueen, who's been a busy beaver hammering away at the chats, and Pete Youngs. Feel free to add them, connect with them, spam them, ask them for help, whatever you like. LinkedIn is how we can stay in touch and follow up. We're going to make a list of the questions as well. We're going to pull them out of the chat box, and actually when we're out of the hot seat, we're going to reflect on this. And if there are any unanswered questions, we will go through that chat box and we'll reach out. But thank you all for participating. You've been a wonderful audience.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.